Welcome back. Well, the Africa Risk Reward Index 2023, a comprehensive tool used to assess the investment landscape and economic potential across the diverse continent of Africa. As investors and businesses increasingly seek opportunities in this dynamic region, understanding the risks and rewards associated with different markets is crucial for making informed decisions. To help us understand the report by Control Risk and Oxford Economics Africa, joining us now is Ms. Oludamilare Adesola, Associate Director, West Africa Control Risk. Great to have you on the show.
Hi there. How are you doing?
Fantastic. So, talk to us about the 2023 Africa Risk Reward Index. Your major findings and what it seeks to achieve, and what countries in Africa are investable with minimum risk and maximum reward.
So this is the 8th edition of the Africa Risk Reward Index, and essentially what we're looking to achieve is to assist businesses that are looking to either grow their business within Africa or to invest in new markets, help them to understand the risk and reward climate, essentially getting into, because many times when you want to make a business decision, what makes the difference between whether you go ahead or you don't is to the extent to which the reward outweighs the risk. And so we've mapped 24 countries, and it's interesting to see the evolution of the investment landscape in all of these major African countries and provide that longer term outlook to say, okay, these are the trends that we have observed in the last 8 editions that we've done, and this is the direction that is likely to continue in. And so it's a lot of information that we have in there, and we essentially assessed the risk using 3 main themes of polarization, finance, and security.
And definitely, this report has been released at a time the world is facing growing geopolitical tensions. But despite all of this, all the risk, African countries hold huge potential. Given the geographic diversity, what are the opportunities for a country like Nigeria, and how best can they be unlocked?
So yes, you're right. There's growing geopolitical tensions, and that's really what we capture in the theme that is polarization. But when it comes to Nigeria, everybody knows that Nigeria has, even in our index, Nigeria came up in the top 3 countries when it comes to rewards. So there's a lot in there, and that's attributable to really the sheer size of Nigeria when it comes to its population and its economy. And so even despite the forex deregulation, where GDPs are categorized or are qualified using dollar rates, Nigeria still remains one of the largest economies in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there are several opportunities. To go through them would be very long, but I'll just highlight one, and that's something that comes up in our report, which is the opportunities in financial services. So a report last year came up to say that in Africa there was about $5 billion raised in Nigeria. Nigeria accounted for about 20% of that, and the majority of even that portion that went into Nigerian startup companies went into fintech. And so we see several opportunities across the board in manufacturing, agro-processing, even in oil and gas. Despite the world moving to energy transition, there's new opportunities coming up there for more sustainable approaches to processing or even exploring the different resources that we have. So the opportunities remain vast, and that's something that investors are very much aware of.
Right, and looking at the report earlier, I did see that Nigeria improved when it comes to risk. That was in 2023. I saw the bar, shifted a bit and showed some kind of improvement, with risk, and I saw reward also improved in 2023. What would you say drove that?
So it's important to caveat that despite the improvement, Nigeria still remains one of the high-risk countries with a score of about 5.5. But at the same time, on the flip side, the reward is also one of the highest in the region. And essentially what drove that is we've seen, like I mentioned earlier, we categorize our risk in this report, we focused on the 3 themes of polarization, finance, and security. And what we've seen is that there has been some improvement in the last 12 months when it comes to security, when it comes to mobilizing forces to address some of the security concerns, particularly when it comes to the Northeast region and Boko Haram and terrorism and some of these challenges that we face. But despite this, I think it's important to, while we do the year-on-year comparison, looking at Nigeria this year and Nigeria last year, it's also important to look at the other regions around Nigeria, whether it's in West Africa or in Africa as a whole, because at the end of the day, we are competing for investor interest. And so you will have investors saying, I would like to come to West Africa. What country is going to be worth my buck? And so essentially what they're going to be looking for is which one has that sweet spot when it comes to risk and reward, that at the end of the day, we know that we're going to, be able to repatriate our funds. That's something that, investors are still very much concerned about it. We've made all this money here in Nigeria, but I'm struggling to get it out. So there's still a whole lot of issues going on locally that need to be addressed. But at the same time, it's good to know that Nigeria is moving towards a path of progress.
Yeah, that is definitely good to know. But what African countries have seen the biggest positive movement in their overall risk-reward scores between, say, 2022 and 2023? And what is Nigeria's performance?
So we've seen Zambia, Morocco, Senegal, Cameroon, they've made improvements, and really it's really driven by different factors. So whether it's a reduction in the risk or an improvement in the reward, or a combination of both. But what you would see across board in all of these different areas is that many African governments are increasingly taking a risk approach to policymaking, where they're looking at policymaking from a business point of view, from a private sector point of view, to be able to say that, okay, if I was a private investor, would I come and put my money in this country? What are the main pain points and how can I address them with policy? And so that's something that we've seen increasingly. And this is really due to the fact that a lot of different policymaking processes are now involving more private sector consultations. You have different committees that have different, industry moguls sitting on those committees that are advising the government on the direction to go to. So it's a mix of both politicians and technocrats, and I think that is really what is essential for moving forward when it comes to using policy to address some of the different risk concerns and amplify the opportunities that exist in the different markets.
Looking at the reports here, I see the countries with the biggest positive movement. We see Zambia, Uganda, Cameroon, Morocco, yes. Senegal. Yes. What can Nigeria learn, from these countries?
So what you would find, the first thing that I would highlight is when it comes to finance and the ability for Nigeria to really key in to the potential that the private sector holds. What you see in that finance, when you talk about finance, is extremely broad. It covers everything from government financing to private sector financing, but even to development, to aid. But essentially what it is that because of the different local issues that exist in the regulatory environment, because the regulatory environment continues to be a little hostile to investors, whether they're foreign investors or local investors, it then puts a cap on the extent to which private sector investments can really be mobilized. And so essentially what you'll find in some of these countries is that they've seen an increase in private sector investment, whether it's FDI or local companies that are just investing more. And essentially what Nigeria can learn is looking at how to harness that potential by creating a business environment that is favorable, and that involves several things.
Right, and when we see most of these countries, the risk reward there with Nigeria, there was about 7.65 for risk, 5.5. Yes, yeah. What do you think would be that sweet spot, for Nigeria at this time, and what policy recommendations would you give us?
To be honest, the sweet spots will vary depending on the investor and their risk appetite. There are some who they don't really care too much about the risk; they just want to know the reward because they have really strong risk models in place to be able to mitigate some of those risks. So it's going to be varied across different sectors. You have investors who they don't want any stress. They don't want any problems. They just want to put their money. And if there's going to be any potential for there's going to be anything that could possibly hinder them making that or experiencing the rewards, they're just going to pull back. But I would say that when it comes to really addressing some of the concerns that we see, it's about creating that favorable business environment, like I mentioned. And this is very varied in the approach that can be taken. It means taking a holistic, big picture approach to policy making, where different regulations are not in contradiction to each other. Whether it's tax regulation on one hand, where the government is looking to ramp up revenue, but at the same time that is being a deterrent to investors because they're now having to pay more tax. So it's really, and again, that involves then bringing the private sector stakeholders to the room, putting them as part of the conversation to be able to understand what some of these, the things that they're considering internally. Because at the end of the day, we just want to have the private sector booming, because that's what's going to create the jobs. That's what's going to create income for the different households. That's what's going to help us to alleviate poverty. So, but while we do this, you can have a very strong policy environment in place. But if you have lingering security issues that Nigeria does, it still doesn't. It's still not enough. And so you can address issues of repatriation and forex scarcity. You can address issues of just general, ease of doing business and how easy it is maybe to export or import or whatever it is, customs. But if those security issues continue to linger, that's going to continue to remain a challenge even in the long term. And so this goes from everything from crime, kidnapping. We've seen an increase in kidnapping, even in some of these areas that previously used to be safe, where kidnapping once upon a time was a thing that only happened in a certain region. Now it has moved across board. We've seen increase in, some of the activities by different groups that are looking to, secession from the country, secede from the country, pardon me. And so, those are some of the considerations that are then had if someone wants to come into the East, for example. If an investor wants to bring their money into the East, they're going to be looking at some of those security concerns. How much does this pose a risk to my operations if I come in to put my money here? Because I'm going to be making my investments here, my assets. It's not very easy to pull out from a country once you've gone in, or even if I'm already in, to expand. And so those are some of the different considerations. And so there's quite a bit that goes into creating that environment that helps investors to mitigate risk and also amplify the different opportunities.
Definitely a fully packed report by Credit Risk there and Oxford. And I do hope that, looking at the bars at some point, see Nigeria's risk, all the way down, maybe to about 2 or 1, that will see reward huge, maybe 10 points. Hopefully, maybe the next time you do that report. Thank you so much. That was Oludamilare Adesola, Associate Director, West Africa Control Risk. Thank you so much.